Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Jonathan Barkan. Jonathan, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk horror.
Oh man, I am so excited to have you here. Now, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. That's why I reached out and wanted to do this.
Thank
But
you.
for the people that don't know you, Jonathan, I would like for
Yeah.
those people to get to know you a little bit. You started for a writer on one of my favorite webzines, Bloody Disgusting, where you eventually became the managing editor and then the editor in chief at Dread Central, where
Yeah.
you are the acquisitions ambassador for Epic Pictures Group and their horror specialty label Dread. Now, you started off as just a writer for Bloody Disgusting, which when it comes to horror writing and things like that. For me, it's always Bloody Disgusting, Dread Central, and Daily Dead. Like that's where I get all my horror news from. And huge fans of all three of those places. And what was it like to, work your way up that ladder from just a writer to eventually being the editor in chief and the acquisitions ambassador for Epic Pictures? What was it like climbing that ladder throughout all these different places?
Man, you got to understand I had no idea what I was doing the whole time. Like from the beginning, because my journey into that, I always thought that I was going to be in the music industry. That was my dream. That was my goal. I have a certificate in music production and engineering that I got from the local community college, and I was trying to break into recording studios to be the guy behind the mixing booth. That was my dream. And one day on Bloody Disgusting, they had a music video premiere, and I was like, holy crap, this is my two worlds colliding in the most amazing of ways. And so when I reached out, not knowing that the person I reached out to was the co-owner of the website, Tom, I I was like, listen, I love horror and I have this certificate. Um, and I like to think that I can string a sentence together. I hope I can do that. Um, so let me write for you guys. And I was actually kind of pushy. I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm going to do this. You just have to give me the rules and guidelines. And they started off by saying, look, 2 album reviews a month. That's kind of the test. We're going to give that to you. And I started reaching out to every single record label I could think of, specifically in the more rock and metal arenas, but also to soundtrack labels. And I said, this is my name. I'm now writing a few album reviews a month for Bloody Disgusting. This is a horror audience. It's a major website. I don't know if you've tapped into that audience, but let's get you in there. And the reception I got was unreal. So that first month, I wrote something like 4 or 5 album reviews. I also wrote 10 news articles, and the record labels were like, we would totally love for you to write album reviews, but also we have these bands coming by your neck of the woods. Do you want to go backstage and do interviews? And I was like, well, of course. Who the hell would say no to that?
Right. Does a bear shit in the woods wipe his ass with a white rabbit? Yeah, I'm there.
Exactly. So I was like, yes, of course we're going to do that. And they're like, that's amazing. We also have this album coming out in a few months and we want to promote it. Can we give away a guitar through Bloody Disgusting? And I was like, of course you can. It was just so exciting. But throughout all of it, I had no formal training. I had no experience getting that. It really was being thrown in the deep end, because you think, for a lot of people that are in this industry, and I have such respect for them, they cut their teeth on their own blogs, on smaller websites. They really worked their way up. And I know you said that I worked my way up. Listen, I stumbled into a position that was already several rungs up the ladder. But admittedly, I didn't know anything. And so I fought for every single step of what I was trying to do. I was learning as I was making mistakes. I was learning as I was making the right moves. And I remember this to this day. There was the moment that I realized, holy crap, I think I'm onto something. I think I'm doing something right. I was forwarded an email from Tom, the co-owner of Bloody Disgusting, and he said, hey, we just got this through our general contact form. It's for you. And I was like, what? Who would be emailing me? And it was a guy from a PR firm. And he said, hey, I would love to be connected with Jonathan Barkan because I see that he's doing a ton of reviews and articles and we love what he's doing. We would like to put him on our mailing list and also start sending him some of our albums for review. And I saw that email and I just looked at it and I was like, someone knows who I am? like that was like a real incredible moment for me. But then what happened is I became friends with the writers for every section of Bloody Disgusting. And I'm a person who, I've been a gamer my whole life. When I can, I love reading comic books. I try and watch horror shows. I haven't had cable or even basic channels since I was really young because my parents, they cut the cord because they thought I was addicted. I probably was. Moving on. But what I would do is I would buy a series when it came out on Blu-ray, and then I was thinking, what can I write about it that hasn't been said already? Things like that. So I started just making myself available for the other sections of the website, writing, for the video game section, for TV, for movies, I remember Brad Miska at one point hit me up, was like, hey, we have no one reviewing Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. And I know, and we're not going to get like any screeners or anything like that. Do you want to just go and write a review for the hell of it? And I was like, yeah, are you kidding? Like, I would love to do that. Like, that sounds incredible. And so by making myself available and by always asking, what can I do better? How can I write better? How can I present my ideas better? How can I be better at what I'm doing? I think having that humility really helped. So from there, then I got the opportunity. Bloody was like, hey, do you want to go to Fantasia in Montreal? And I was like, a film festival? I've never been to one in my life. Let's do it. And then set visit opportunities. And I started growing and growing and growing and attending more set visits and more conventions and more film markets. And a lot of the Bloody Disgusting team was located in Chicago, which is only a 4-hour drive from where I live. So I was like, I'll drive out to you guys and we can hang out, work together in person. If there's a convention in your area, I'll work it with you, because like I got sent, I don't even know, like for the first few years at Bloody, I was sent something like 100 to 200 CDs every year, because they were still sending CDs for review purposes. And I just had them. So we would sell these CDs that I got at conventions, along with Blu-rays and DVDs that were sent to us. And because we just didn't have the room, we were running out of room to store all this stuff. And I remember one day I was hanging out with Brad, Tom, and TJ, who was the writer for the video game section at the time. And Brad and I were talking about a whole bunch of things. And I just jokingly asked, I was like, look, man, I'm writing for everything and doing this like full time and all this. And I don't really have a title. Am I like the managing editor or something? And Brad was like, huh, yeah, you are. That's literally how that went. It wasn't some like big event. It was a joke that was affirmed.
Right.
And yeah, and then going to Epic and eventually becoming the editor-in-chief at Dread and doing acquisitions. Like acquisitions, I had no training. I had no formal training whatsoever in that either. I was thrown into the deep end. When I joined Dread Central, one of the things that happened was Epic needed someone at South by Southwest. And so when I signed on to join the Dread Central team, like the next day they booked me a ticket to Austin for South by Southwest, and I went to a genre filmmakers dinner that was sponsored by Epic, and one of the co-owners, Shaked, pulled me aside at one point. He's like, all right, listen, those guys over there, they have a really great horror movie that we would love to get for Epic. Go over there and get it. What? I don't know what to do. I don't know, like, how am I supposed to sell the company? I don't know. I know literally nothing about all of this. And so, but I went over and I just started talking, and I was just myself. And I asked, like, we just started shooting the shit about a bunch of random stuff. We bonded over our love, me and these filmmakers, we bonded over our love of Finnish death metal, and we just connected in that regard. I don't remember if we ended up getting the movie, but I'm still friends with those filmmakers.
Right.
And the relationships that I built from there have only grown, not just from those filmmakers, but from all the filmmakers that I met there. And I started just learning as much as I could to understand what does this position, what does this position entail?
Mhm.
What does it require from me? And so then I started doing all of that, acquiring films. And yeah, and then I got the opportunity to leave the world of film journalism behind and focus entirely on film industry.
Sure.
And I think something really important to note is that at one point, actually not at one point, at like infinite points while I was writing for Bloody and while I was writing for Dread, I kept having those moments where I went, this is my life. This is
Yeah.
incredible. I'm going to festivals. I'm meeting with stars. I'm becoming friends with them. Like I can sit here and text Barbara Crampton and like shoot her. Hey Barbara, how are you doing? She's like, hey Jonathan, doing great. How are you? Like just a friendly conversation. Like that's something that I can do. Like this is my life. This is incredible. I can't imagine doing anything besides this. Like I've found it. And then I got asked to do film acquisitions and I was like, no, like this is where it's at. Holy crap, this is incredible. Um, and here I am now, the creator and director of a documentary, and I'm like, God, filmmaking, that's the dream. Just working with amazing people who want to tell amazing stories.
Mhm.
This is where I need to be. So I think a really important lesson that I learned, and I know this question didn't come up, but I think I want to get it through because I think it's important. A really important lesson that I learned, a very meaningful one, is I thought I found my purpose many times, and then came something came through that opened my eyes to more opportunities, and I decided to chase those, as
Mhm.
risky as they were. So yeah, that's I mean, I don't know if that answered your question. I'm sorry, I tend to ramble. I tend to go on long-winded responses.
I love it because it shows, like I said, you're not only like the hard work and dedication you put in to get where you are, but you still have a huge passion for this. This is still not a job for you. This is still a passion. I mean, when you go from being a writer to a managing editor to an editor in chief, and now you're the head of US distribution at VMI Releasing, the distribution arm of VMI Worldwide. You were just an executive producer on a film we were talking about that is so polarizing, Skinamarink, and then the upcoming documentary, which you kind of talked about, mental health and horror. Now, before we talk about mental health and horror, 'cause that's something I really do want to talk about. First off,
Yeah,
Skinamarink. We talked about this a little bit ago. Very polarizing film. Made
yeah,
you guys spent 15,000 Canadian, which is about 11,000 US on it, and brought in over 2 million in the box office. You look at Terrifier 2, which had a small budget, and look what that brought in. And what that's showing us is original horror sells without marketing. Like, I want you guys to listen to what I'm telling you. You have these people that you don't have this huge marketing budget where you've got trailers all over the place and
yeah,
posters everywhere. It's the word of mouth of horror fans. And what little bit that we do,
yes,
that's where the word spreads. We don't
yeah.
need 10 trailers in front of Infinity War or Endgame in order for this original horror movies to sell to people. So, what's it like to be a part of Skinamarink, this movie that just took the horror world by storm?
Yeah, so Skinamarink is an unbelievable success story for many reasons. And I want to make it very clear. I wasn't part of the creative team. Like I wasn't there when they were shooting it. I wasn't there when they
Sure.
were editing it. I came aboard because I found the trailer in the bowels of Reddit and fell in love, reached out to Kyle, and we connected. Like I acquired that film 6 months before its world premiere at Fantasia. But that was something that I also helped orchestrate. Like Kyle submitted it, but I reached out to Mitch Davis and I said, listen, this was submitted. You need to check it out. It's Canadian horror. It's super different. It's going to be polarizing, but I promise you, you will get reactions. And we confirmed that. And listen, I'll tell you from my experience, independent horror films, when they play at festivals, you are, unless it's something that is generating buzz, you're lucky if you get 5, 10, maybe 15 reviews, like
Mhm.
max, out of a film festival, because people are going after the movies that have the buzz, that the indie horror movie that is generating interest and word of mouth. That's what people want to write about, because it's, listen, websites need clicks in order to survive, so they need
Big
to
time.
review this. It's I do not shy away from the reality of the business while also trying to stay true to the passion of the genre. So Skinamarink comes around, and out of its world premiere, 22 reviews from some of the biggest outlets, and with the lowest rating being a mixed positive, and people saying it's Poltergeist by way of David Lynch. It's the scariest movie I've ever seen. You've never seen a horror film like this. Like all of these kinds of pull quotes that I look at it and I'm just like, every one of these needs to be on a poster. Every one of these needs to be in a trailer. Like there's not a bad line out there. And then I licensed the deal with Shudder and IFC, which was Kyle's dream. Like, if this can get on Shudder, that's my dream. We made that happen. We got that going. And then out of a festival in Europe that I will not name, that Skinamarink was playing the virtual portion. We were promised security, we were promised safety, and within 24 hours of it going live, it was on every torrent website, every single one. And I'll say this. The entire virtual lineup of that festival was torrented. It was all pirated.
Man. Bullshit.
I mean, all of it. It's bullshit. It's absolutely awful. Listen, when it's a Marvel movie being pirated, they pump so much into P&A and they have so much marketing and everything going on that the amount that they're going to lose it's not even a penny in a bucket. It's a penny inside of the Grand Canyon. But with independent horror films, every illegal stream actually does impact things, because psychologically speaking, the vast majority of people, they watch a movie once, they're never going to watch it again.
Right.
And that's everyone. That's me. The vast majority of films I've seen, I have never seen a second time. When it comes to horror, yeah, I'm a repeat viewer, but for most things, I really don't care. I'm not going to watch it again. And with a movie as polarizing as Skinamarink, even the people that are like, I love it, a lot of them are going to say, like, I loved it. I'll watch it again in like 10, 15 years. So the initial release, which is where a lot of numbers matter, their view isn't going to be in there. So we had that terrifying experience with the release. But then it became the title out of that bundle of movies that just people wouldn't stop talking about. So it was on TikTok where people were saying it's a cursed film. It was on Reddit where people were saying, have you seen this movie Skinamarink? And it became a big point of discussion of the ethics of piracy versus the need for immediate gratification. And for some people, piracy, I understand where they're coming from, because as we were saying, before we started this, there are certain countries around the world that actively do not license horror films for release for their audiences. So those audiences have literally no other option but to pirate in order to watch it. They don't want to do that. They want to support these films. They want to give their money, but it's just not going to happen because it's just not coming to their country. So Skinamarink just exploded. I think prior to the theatrical release on January 13th, Skinamarink had between 20 and 25 million views on the hashtag on TikTok, which, I was talking with someone who works in marketing, and he said, do you know how much we have to pay in order to get 20 to 25 million views on anything? Like you got that organically. You don't understand just how huge that was. And when we did the deal with Shudder, they even said, like, listen, we're going to try and do theatrical, maybe 5 to 10 theaters. And then it got like a ton of buzz. And so like, okay, let's do 250 theaters. And then it started to really generate buzz. Rolling Stone, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, New York Times, Collider, AV Club, like everyone was writing about Skinamarink, Slash Film, all these places. And so they released it to 692 screens in its initial weekend, which for anyone who has seen Skinamarink, everyone, whether you love it or hate it, your mind should be blown that movie was released in almost 700 screens in North America. And it was a holiday weekend, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And in its 4-day run, it made just under $900,000. And then they expanded to more theaters, just over 800. And now we're like basically out of it. Over $2 million for a movie that cost 15,000 Canadian, that for all intents and purposes should not have been released in theaters. I love that it is, but I'm a realist. I'm a businessman. This is an analog horror movie that moves slower than a glacier, and it is very wild and different. But hey, it tapped into a lot of people's fears, a lot of people's
Yeah.
traumas, and that spoke to a kind of universal fear that people wanted to experience.
It's a universal horror feeling,
Yeah.
something that a nightmare that everybody can have. And while we're talking about real life nightmares, mental health and horror, this is something that I've been hearing about a lot for a very long time. And I'm very excited that we're finally getting to the ending portion where we're going to be able to see mental health and horror. Do we have a release date yet?
We don't have a release date. We're in post-production. We're deep into the edit of the feature. As a matter of fact, I was talking with my editor earlier this morning, and we're getting into the last kind of sections that need to be edited. And I've seen, rough cuts of huge chunks of the film, and I am, on a personal level, detached from everyone else, I'm exceptionally proud and excited for what is being put together here. When I factor in everyone else, the community and people who are going to see it, I am pants shittingly terrified. So
So for the people that don't know, like obviously, and I want to say this right now off the rip, if you are having problems with mental health, please reach out to somebody. My DMs
yeah,
personally are always open through Sledgehammer Horror, whether it's Twitter, Instagram. I know that battling mental health is a battle. I've been battling mental health for a very long time, and you're never alone. So, especially in the horror
yeah.
world, in the horror community, you always have people that you can reach out to that will take care of you, that will help you, that will talk you through any problems you're going through. Because what you're feeling, I know it may seem like you're the only person that's ever gone through something this dark and this deep. I promise you, we've all been there, and we will do anything we can to help you get out of the hole that you're in. It can never get so dark that the light will never come back. So please, if you take away anything from Sledgehammer Horror and anything I've ever said, please take away that. You have people here that care about you, that love you, and will do anything to help you out. So, a little bit about mental health and horror, the documentary. Can you tell people a little bit about what it is and what it entails?
Yeah, so the purpose of mental health and horror is to basically present the hypothesis that for certain people, horror movies can be an effective tool for the treatment of whatever mental illness or mental illnesses you may be living with. And so we reached out to not only people within the horror industry, your writers, your producers, your podcasters, your bloggers, and people outside of the horror community, everyday people as well who are horror fans. We also reached out to mental health professionals, the therapists, the psychotherapists, the psychologists, the researchers, because we wanted there to be actual evidence to back this up. I didn't want this to be anecdotal that people could then very simply say, well, there's no facts, so it's all meaningless. No, I
Sure.
wanted there to be the evidence. And there were two goals in mind from the very, very beginning. The first one is that horror, and by horror, I mean the community, I mean the genre, I mean the films, I mean the media, just everything surrounding horror. We're always on the defensive against mainstream culture and their impressions of who we are and what kind of people we are.
Mm-hmm.
You have your Tipper Gores, you have your Tucker Carlsons that will do whatever they can to blame horror for
Aye, aye, aye.
for everything, for shootings, for murders, for drug use, for anything and everything out there, even though study after study after study after study has shown that is not true. So in a way, I wanted this documentary to be, instead of us constantly being on the defensive, I wanted this to be an offensive maneuver. I wanted this to be something that people could say, hey, we're playing this card. You want to fight it? You want to say that we're wrong? You want to say that this is not real? Then provide the evidence, because we are. We
Yep.
have the evidence. We have the people backing this up. We have everything. It's your turn to be on the defensive. You need to show that this isn't true. And the second thing, and this ties directly to what you were saying just a moment ago, I want, and this is going to be very cliche, but there is still honesty in it. I wanted that kid in the middle of nowhere who does not have a robust horror community around them. friends or whatever, and who also doesn't have access to good mental health resources in their area. I wanted them to know that they're not alone.
Mhm.
And then I had to do some thinking. I had to do some self-reflection, because I thought to myself, okay, I want that kid in the middle of nowhere to know these things. Who is that kid? What do I envision that kid looking like? And that's when I made the decision that the kid needs to be nameless and faceless, because it needs to be anyone. It needs to be
Anyone.
anything. Anyone, anything. So that's why I really made it a point to try and show the diversity of the horror community in this film. We have people who are young, people who are old, black, white, queer, straight,
Mhm.
non-binary. We have everyone, because all of them are a part of the horror community. They are
Yeah.
all part of this horror family. And so that kid in the middle of nowhere, if they were just looking at nothing but, and I say this with tongue in cheek, bearded white guys talking about horror. But if that's not who they are, then they're going to say, this is all really well and good, but I don't see myself. So I wanted
Yeah.
to show people that really demonstrate the beautiful tapestry that is the horror community. So, your
So
bearded white guys,
inclusive, man.
you will see your bearded white guys. You'll also see your queer disabled women. You'll see transgender people. You will see as many people as we could. And it's not like I didn't go here like checking the boxes. I need
Sure.
all of this, but I definitely actively sought out people from those communities that I felt had something to say. So mental health and horror is at its core a well-intentioned and positively aimed offensive tool for the horror community to show that the genre has enormous value and emotional purpose,
Sure.
and it's for everyone.
I couldn't be more excited about mental health and horror and what that's going to bring to the community. And like you said, if it helps that one person to realize who they are and make sure that they're
Yeah,
comfortable in their own skin, you've done your job, man. So there's
that's
nothing more important than that.
that's really the goal. That I said to my team from the very beginning, if we help even one person, we've
Yeah.
achieved our goal.
Yeah.
So it's still very scary, because this is such a delicate subject. It's such a sensitive subject that people feel very passionate about, because it's very personal to each of us. Our mental illnesses, our mental struggles. As you said, it may feel like it's yours and yours alone, but so many people have gone through it. Both are true. Both
Yeah.
are absolutely true. Um, what you go through is 100% your own lived experience. And at the same time, there will be other people who may not have gone through the exact same thing, but they've gone through something similar enough that you can have a common shared language. And you should, because knowing that you're not alone and knowing that you have that support is so, so important. And directly to what you were saying, you wish you had that video of the kids talking about horror. At least 50% of the people that we interviewed for the documentary said in some form or another, I wish that I had something like this when I was growing up.
Mhm.
And I was like, yeah, it would have been amazing. Admittedly, at the time when we were growing up, mental health wasn't discussed nearly as openly. So this might have just fallen flat on its face and been buried and never to be seen again. But I think we need to recognize and live our lives by, everyone has many mottos that we live by. One of the mottos that I live by is, the first time, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best
Mhm.
time is now. So yes, a lot of us would have benefited from having a documentary like this when we were growing up. And I'm so happy and so excited and hopeful that this documentary will help this generation of horror fans
Yes.
who are growing up.
But it's the future. You know what I mean? And it's not taboo anymore to talk about our mental health like it was. Back then it was, get the sand out of your vagina. You know what I mean? Like, but now we are actually open and willing to talk, and not just talk, but listen. and try to figure out where the issues reside. A chemical imbalance is not a bad thing. You wouldn't be
Yeah.
mad at somebody if you found out they had cancer, which is a chemical imbalance in your body. A mental chemical imbalance is the same thing. There's nothing wrong with you. You just need a little help with the people around you. So don't
Yeah.
ever forget that. It's not your fault. Now, in order for you to make something as influential and impactful as mental health and horror, horror had to start for you somewhere. So now,
Yeah.
my friend, I want to, kind of lighten it back up a little bit. It's been a little heavy here for a second, which I appreciate. I love,
Yeah,
because there's
absolutely.
nothing, I've said it 1,000 times. And I want to talk about how horror started for you. Let's go back to the past. Your
Yeah.
first horror movie, and Jonathan, your first horror movie was.
So my first horror movie memory is Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Rennie Harlin's Nightmare 4, The Dream Master.
What an amazing movie. Obviously, I've dressed for the occasion.
Yep.
It's We'll talk a little more about my relationship with this movie here in a little bit, but I absolutely love The Dream Master. So, do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen it?
Young. So it was on TV. I think it was showing on like TBS or something. I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. And I was flipping through channels. That's what I was, just sitting on the couch. It was a Sunday, I want to say, just sitting down, lazy day, flipping through channels, and I stumbled across I landed on TBS or whatever, and here's this mullet, dark-haired kid that is like looking at his waterbed, and something's going on, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. I've always wanted a waterbed. I'm immediately invested in this story. And then this beautiful naked woman emerges, and I'm just like, oh, well, this is unique. Like, what's going on here? And he's got this grin on his face because she is in the parlance of r/men writing women, she was boobing boobily under the water.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just this really kind of uh entrancing scene, especially for a very young boy who is on the cusp of finding Playboy magazines in the woods behind the park. And suddenly she goes under the water, and this guy's looking through, where'd she go, what's going on? And Freddy bursts through the waterbed and pulls him under and like seals the plastic sheeting. And my mom came in and was like, what are you watching? And I was like, I think it's something with that Freddy guy, because Freddy at that point was a cultural icon. You couldn't not know who Freddy was. And I was like, I think it's one of these Freddy movies. And my mom just grabbed the controller and changed the channel. So I didn't actually watch the whole movie, but like that scene was ingrained in my mind because I was already interested in horror through other mediums. I had a Nintendo and I was playing Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest.
I think you started on that shit.
I loved reading, and so I was reading, the Schwartz and Gamble Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and I had a huge collection of Goosebumps. So, I already loved horror, but that was the first horror movie memory where it was like an adult horror, and not something that was, a bit more childlike, a bit more, aimed at kids, like Return to Oz, which as adults we look back and we're like, what the am I watching? This is nightmare fuel. But as a kid, you're like, this is super cool. It's never ending story, which by the way, never ending story, the Gmork, let's talk about terrifying. And so, but this was the first adult horror scene that I saw, and God, did it stick. And I was like, I need way more of that. And what's interesting is I didn't see another Freddy movie, another Nightmare on Elm Street film for a while. And the first one that I watched from beginning to end was actually Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So I started at the end with the last one, and then I went to the beginning and worked my way through.
Sure.
But Freddy was kind of the awakening of my adult horror movie love.
I just want to say real quick, when it comes to Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, how the fuck was a kid in 1989 supposed to know that you take a red crystal and go to the end of the wastelands and kneel down for 5 seconds, and then a tornado would come and pick you up and take you over? That game, listen,
I don't think it was 5 seconds. I think it was like 20 seconds, which in kid time in a video game, you're like, 20 seconds of not moving in a video game, that's an eternity.
Dude, and like I just told this story a couple weeks ago. I grew up in a video store, and every Friday, if I did my job, which was to put the VCR back in the VHS rewinder and rewind the tape and then put it back on the shelf, I got to take home one Nintendo cartridge and one movie. That was for the weekend. That was my allowance. I can't tell you how many times I rented Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest trying to beat that game and could never figure out what to do. I remember eventually I got like Nintendo Power and I seen it. I was like, are you shitting me? Like, this is what I'm supposed to do? How was I supposed to figure that out? But
man, speaking of Nintendo Power and Castlevania and horror, just a super quick. Do you remember the controversy? I think it was either issue 1 or 2. It was one of the very, very first issues of Nintendo Power, and the cover was of Simon, with his helmet, his cape, and the sword, and holding the head of Dracula. The outrage, the absolute outrage over Nintendo Power. Oh man,
people were freaked about that. They're like, "This is too bad. This is terrifying."
It leaned into that whole thing of video games cause violence, and it's like no they don't. You have a hero who beheaded Dracula, and I'm sitting here like that cover came like in the same decade as Clash of the Titans, a beloved film, one of my favorite kind of Greek mythology films, and here's Perseus with his sword and his cape holding the head of Medusa, and everyone's like, hey, this is great. Like there is such a it really kind of hammered home for me that horror lives under different rules.
Oh, taboo. It was so taboo when we were younger. 100% agree with you. And, like you said, you go back and play Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest now. If that caused anybody to be violent, the only reason why is because they couldn't figure out that you had to have the red crystal and go to the edge of the wastelands. That's the only reason. It wasn't because of the game.
And the only thing they did was
figure it out.
They just threw the controller down. They might have broken the controller, and they're like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna play, something else." So, and
Mario,
that's the
jump on these Koopas for hours.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the extent of it.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously now we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. The Dream Master, and obviously Nightmare on Elm Street is a huge franchise. The franchise has expanded many movies now. Which movie in the Nightmare franchise would you say is your favorite?
Oh, dude, it's hard because I waffle constantly between 1, 3, and New Nightmare. Those are always the 3 that I really love and want to go back to. I will say that I am a huge fan of 6, of Freddy's Dead. I love the cheesiness, the campiness, the absurdity. I just have so much fun with that movie, especially talking about Nintendo Power Glove. Like, come on. Is it a great
Now you're playing with power.
Yeah, like it's so much fun. Is it a great nightmare film? No, but do I have a blast watching it every single time?
Yeah. See, I'm one of the people that defend that because I remember my uncle took me to see that movie in 3D in the movie theaters. So like I remember that, and I don't think it's even at the bottom of my list either. I think that there's a couple of Nightmare on Elm Street movies that I put below Freddy's Dead, but me and you are very close. I think that the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie is the OG. I think that the most fun Nightmare on Elm Street movie is the Dream Warriors. I think that's probably the most fun and the most, when you're watching the kids, the one you root for the kids most actively.
It has my favorite kill. It has my favorite Freddy kill, the Philip marionette. Every single time, every time I watch it, once those tendons get pulled out, it's nails on a chalkboard. I shiver uncontrollably, but I love how inventive it is. It's so cool.
See, and that's exactly it. It has the best kills. You love the kids in it. You're actively rooting for the kids. Freddy's still a dick. You have the welcome to prime time, bitch. Welcome to prime time, bitch. Which is one of my favorite scenes ever. But my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie is the Dream Master. And I think it's because this is the one I watched the most growing up. This is the one that was always on. It was this, Halloween 5, and Friday the 13th Part 3. These are the 3 of the big 3 that I watched the most growing up. So obviously right now with Hollywood, remakes, sequels is all the rage. We've gotten Halloween, Scream. We just got announced and I Know What You Did last summer. But, Friday the 13th is getting its revival finally. We're getting the TV show. We are just announced Sean Cunningham was doing the rights to another new movie. Nightmare on Elm Street has laid pretty dormant since the Jackie Earle Haley remake. Now, would you like to see them tap back into this world and do another Nightmare on Elm Street film, or maybe a prequel or a different type of sequel? Would you like to see this done again?
I mean, I've spoken openly about my my want to see this continue. And I've spoken about this prequel idea to anyone and everyone. I have no problem, making it public, but I would love to see a prequel done in the style of Seven, where it follows the detectives who are trying to find the Springwood slasher, and it doesn't tap into Freddy's powers in the slightest. I don't want to see Freddy be Freddy. I want to see Freddy be the Springwood slasher. I want to know the horror of that. I want to know Fred Krueger's truly evil ways, because I think, there, when you have Freddy as the dream demon, there's an element of detachment. This isn't real. This isn't something that can happen. Do I have nightmares? Yes. Do I ever actually hurt myself? No. But the idea of someone out there just killing children, that's real. That can happen. And you do it in a gritty, angry, dour, morose way, like something like 7 or 8mm. Then you're going to have a movie that does something really exciting and interesting. I would also love it if someone made a sequel to the Nightmare series, where the power itself transfers, where the power, kind of like Jason Goes to Hell, but not I'm gonna piss off a lot of horror fans here, and I apologize. Some kind of like Jason Goes to Hell, but not shit. And I think the concept of the dream demon that kind of lives inside of an avatar, that lives inside of this horrific champion, is really fascinating. I want to see how that can be explored and taken elsewhere. Listen, I love Robert. I love Freddy. And I'll go on and I'll say this. I think Jackie Earle Haley was a fantastic Freddy, just he was burdened with a really awful script and, just a terrible movie. But his performance was great. And I think if they wanted to bring him back, I would watch him very happily do that. But I also think that if they're going to do something with Nightmare on Elm Street, I want them to really lean into how nightmarish and terrifying the dream sequences can be. Because all of the, in my mind, they never really got so absurd or so surreal that I felt like nothing is safe, nothing is secure. So yeah, give it to someone like, I would love to see Adam Egypt Mortimer, who did Daniel Isn't Real. I'd love to see him do a nightmare film. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. I think Jordan Peele could take that and do something really, really exciting with it. But yeah, give it to someone who will take it in a new direction. I don't need to see Freddy killing kids in their dreams again. I've seen that. I have plenty of movies that scratch that itch. I want to see them take that in a new direction.
Three things I gotta say real quick. One, Jason Goes to Hell's a masterpiece. I just want to throw that out there real quick. I love that film.
To each their own. I love that you love it.
Here's another thing I'm going to say that pisses a lot of people off, and I've said this numerous times. Jackie Earle Haley played Freddy Krueger better than Robert Englund. Now, hear me out. What I mean by that. Okay. Robert Englund played Freddy Krueger, the child killer, and was getting slimed on Nickelodeon, and everybody loved him. You're not supposed to love the child killer. You're supposed to hate that guy. Agreed. And Jackie Earle Haley made you hate that character. Every time Freddy Krueger was on the screen in that remake, you were like, oh, fuck this guy. And at first, that's why I didn't like it. But then I thought about it, like, I'm not supposed to like him. That's the guy that kills kids. You're supposed to hate this guy. But Robert Englund has so much charisma and so much character, and he's so big that you just couldn't help but fall in love with the character. And you're not supposed to. So, like, when it comes to playing a child-killing psychopath, Jackie Earle Haley did the job. Like, he made you hate the character. So, I will stick up for Jackie Earle Haley's performance all the time. I'm with you. I will totally stick up for him. He did everything he could in a bad movie. Period. Yeah. And then the third thing I was going to say, I talked about Jackie Earle Haley. I talked about Jason Goes to Hell. Have you seen the deleted scenes from the OG Nightmare on Elm Street?
Some of them. Which one specifically?
There's a deleted scene where Nancy and her mom are in the basement, and she's pulling out Freddy's glove from the furnace, and she tells Nancy the story about her younger sibling that Fred Krueger had killed. So, he killed Nancy's, I can't remember if it's her little brother or her little sister. I would love to see, you were talking about the detective, see Officer Thompson, trying to find the Springfield slasher and try to get revenge for his kid. I think that would be a great idea, to go
Yeah,
back in that type of way. Because it
yeah.
really does affect this family a lot. And I don't know why they took that scene out. You can find it on YouTube, guys, if you haven't seen it. But she's telling the story about how her younger sibling was killed by Fred Krueger. And that's one of the reasons why her and her husband went so hard in the killing of Freddy Krueger, because he had took their kid away from them. So I think that's one that we could really, really play into, if you do a prequel story and, like a Seven style, noir type thing, you could really have Officer Thompson as a younger police officer trying to catch the Springfield slasher after the slasher had killed his kid. I think that could work wonderfully.
Yeah, and it creates like that right there. That's the emotional hook. You start
Mhm.
with Officer Thompson finding the body
Yeah.
of his own child and then being told like you're off the case because you're too close to it, and then either going rogue or like the other detectives are doing the story, are investigating and he's investigating, and they're working together. But again, we have to remember that the end of Fred Krueger's tale is that the community murdered him after botched paperwork. Like the system didn't necessarily fail so much as one person made a mistake and then he got let off, and then there was a collective murder. It's
But that could be it. Officer Thompson wasn't supposed to be on the case. He was on the case, and since he was trying to cover his tracks, he slipped up on some paperwork. Boom, Fred Krueger is free.
there you go. There's so many things that you can do with that storyline where it taps into what we're already living. I mean, you think horror films, as so many of us know, are a reflection of what we're going through in society. That is something that we can pinpoint in like every decade has it. And even right now, I think there's a lot of that going on. But having a police officer botch the paperwork taps into what we have going on right now with talking about police discourse and responsibility and accountability. And then when is the community forgiven for these acts,
Right.
versus when are they blamed? Like there's so many interesting little threads that you can pull there. And yeah, like, and then it kind of asks, who is the monster? Like the remake, there I'll make this very clear. I don't like the remake. I think it's terrible. I think Jackie Earle Haley's performance is fantastic. He has a terrible script, whatever. When I was watching it in theaters, the moment when I was like, oh, we're doing something interesting here, is when they suggested that Freddy was innocent. And I was like, listen, I don't think it's necessarily the best storyline, but you're doing something different, and that's what I want. Like in the OGs, Freddy was guilty. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. In this remake, they're suggesting he's innocent. That adds an element. I'm excited. And then they made him even worse. Like, not only is it child killer, he takes photos of them naked. And I was like, come on. You were on an interesting path, and then you just were like, let's make it worse. How about that?
Right.
No, he's still the same piece of shit.
Right.
So
and that's why, like in this one, like when he's with Nancy on the bed and he's like, "What do you want to play now?" And she's like, "Fuck you," and he's like, "Sounds fun." You're like, "Oh, stop it, you nasty motherfucker!" Like, I hate you. So, man, I've had an amazing time talking about everything from your first horror movie to Skinamarink to mental health and horror. But now I do have one more question for you. My little buddy Ghostface is here, Jonathan, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Jonathan? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Oh man, it's so difficult. It changes based on the weather. But the films that I keep coming back to, the ones that I just like, I feel comfort watching them. You've obviously got, the first three Alien films. I put Alien 3 right up there with Alien and Aliens. You've got The Shining, Nightbreed, Big Trouble in Little China, Halloween, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, definitely. And then in terms of more recent films, like Relic, really, really affected me. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm looking at literally at my Blu-rays right now, like, man, what's jumping out at me? I'll tell you this. This isn't answering your question, but I'll tell you the horror movie that is the only horror film to put me into a full-blown panic attack because I was that scared. Uh, I'm terrified of spiders. I can't stand them. I used to be able to watch Arachnophobia, but I would hate it. But now I can't do it. Eight-legged freaks, even. I can't do
Yeah.
eight-legged freaks, even. But the movie that put me into a full-blown panic attack, the original The Fly with Vincent Price. And it's specifically that scene where the half fly, half
Help
human
me!
is in the web
Help
stuck, and he's like,
me!
"Help me!" And then they show the shot from his perspective, looking up at the spider coming down with his clicking fangs, just doing this, and I lost it. I
Yeah.
wrapped myself in a blanket. I was sobbing, and it lasted all of like 5 minutes. Like Vincent Price picked up the stone and he crushed them. I think it was Vincent Price. I don't know because I will never watch it again. But he picked up the stone and crushed them both. And it was over. Like the scene was over. I was fine. I was okay. But during that like 30 seconds, oh my God,
Yeah.
I was not in a good place. But I love the remake. So
Yeah.
there's that.
One of the best love stories of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, I've had an amazing time hanging out with you for a little while. But before we go, I always have to ask you the same question. And since the first piece of horror that you saw was Nightmare 4, what we're going to do is bounce back to that movie, and we're going to judge that movie on a skull count. Now, Jonathan, we're not judging it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. What
Yeah.
we're doing is strictly judging what you were able to see on how it affected you on that viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 skulls being super effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. From what you were able to see of Nightmare 4, what would your ranking be?
5. In terms of effectiveness, it changed my life. I am here right now because Freddy burst out of a waterbed.
Yeah. Yep. It's so funny because like my first horror movie was, and it's still my favorite to this day, House from 1986. Roger Cobb.
Yeah.
That's my shit, man. Like that is like they're doing a reboot of that movie, and I am literally throwing my name in that hat. I will do anything to be a part of that film. I'll be one of the guys in Vietnam. I'll be one of the freaks that comes up and asks him to sign his book. I'll do anything. But I wouldn't be Ken Sledge without House 1986. And everybody that knows me, and whether you're new to the channel or you've been here a while, you know I don't condone drug use. If you want to do something responsibly, more power to you, but that's not who I am. Horror movies, to me, that is my drug. And the first time I watched House 1986, I got that high. And ever since then, I've been chasing that dragon, trying to get that high again, trying to get that high again. And I just love the feeling. I mean, and I thought, I'm 37 years old. I'm desensitized to horror. It doesn't scare me anymore. Then a movie like The Dark and the Wicked comes around and scares the dog shit out of me, completely unsettles me. A movie like Skinamarink, where you're just unsettled and anxious throughout the whole movie. Like, when's it going to happen? Just please let it fucking happen so I can stop feeling this way in my chest. Like there's so many moments like that throughout these movies where I'm like, I don't care how old I am. They're still going to get to me and they're still going to make me feel these things. And it's amazing to be a part of this stuff. And I want to remind you guys one more time, all of Jonathan's social media links are down in the description below. So make sure you're following him on social media. That way you can stay up to date on everything that he has coming up. I'm telling you, mental health and horror is going to be something very special. And I want you guys to be able to check this out when it drops. So when it drops, I'm hopefully going to be doing a special on Sledgehammer Horror about it. So that way we can try to get the word out a little more, because I'm very, very excited for what this can do potentially for the community. So Jonathan, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everyone else, as always, if you haven't already, please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow us on social media so you can stay up to date on everything we're doing as well. And until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.